Welcome to the Town of Los Gatos Joint Town Council Parking Authority special meeting of April 14th, 2014. At this time, I'd like to advise those in attendance to please silence your cell phones or other communication devices. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Thank you and good evening. Councilmember Diane McNutt.
Here.
Councilmember Barbara Spector.
Here.
Councilmember Joe Przynski.
Here.
Vice Mayor Marcia Jensen.
Here.
Mayor and Chair Steve Leonardis.
Here. Will those in attendance please join me in saying the Pledge of Allegiance this evening?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
At this time, I'd like to invite our Poet Laureate, Mrs. Erica Goss, to the podium. Well, before you speak, we'll do a short presentation in honor of Poetry Month. For those who don't know, every April is Poetry Month in Los Gatos, and here tonight is our Poet Laureate, Erica Goss. And she's done a fantastic job for the town of Los Gatos in this role. I was part of the committee that selected her about 1 year and 4 months ago, and she has taken it to a new level. Tonight we are here to present her with a proclamation on behalf of Poetry Month, and I will read that proclamation, and then Ms. Goss is going to share with us a couple poems for your enjoyment in honor of Poetry Month. So here it is. Whereas National Poetry Month seeks to highlight the extraordinary legacy and ongoing achievement of poets, introduce people to the pleasures and benefits of reading poetry, bring poets and poetry to the public in innovative ways, and make poetry an important part of our children's lives. And whereas Town of Los Gatos has appointed Erica Goss as Poet Laureate, and Ms. Goss has engaged in efforts to make poetry an essential part of the arts and humanities in Los Gatos, affecting every aspect of life in Los Gatos, including education, the economy, and community pride. Now, therefore, be it resolved, I, Stephen Leonardis, by virtue of the authority invested in me as the mayor of Los Gatos, do deem it appropriate and do hereby proclaim the month of April 2014 to be National Poetry Month within the town of Los Gatos, and call upon all citizens to make poetry a part of their daily lives in Los Gatos. Please give a round of applause for Ms. Erica Goss and Poetry Month. This is for you when you're done, and you can use this microphone. And feel free to go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you to the Town Council and to the Town of Los Gatos for trusting me with this great responsibility. Over the last 14 months, I have visited schools, I've visited our local schools, and I've talked to young people about poetry, and it's amazing to me how important this is in their lives. But it's not something that you would know if you didn't ask them. They're not going to come up to you and say, I think poetry is really important. But if you talk to them, you'll find out that it is a very effective way for young people to express themselves in a way that is honest and very creative. So, in honor of National Poetry Month, and because the mayor specially requested it, I am going to read 2 poems by Robert Frost and a poem that I wrote myself. And the first poem is The Road Not Taken, which I know is a favorite of several people in Los Gatos. By Robert Frost. 2 roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both. And be one traveler, long I stood, and looked down one as far as I could to where it bent in the undergrowth. Then took the other, just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear, though as for that, the passing there had worn them really about the same. And both that morning equally lay in leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day, yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. That was for you, Steve. Thank you. That's an important lesson for all of us. Be yourself. And sometimes you have to make hard choices. So this poem is called Mending Wall, and after much discussion today over social media, I decided that this poem would be most appropriate because it deals with things like lot line disputes, which I know the town council has to deal with from time to time, and things like gun permits, which I know has been a hot topic here in town. So bear with me, this is a little bit long, but it's well worth it. Mending Wall. Something there is that doesn't love a wall, that sends the frozen groundswell under it, and spills the upper boulders in the sun, and makes gaps even two can pass abreast. The work of hunters is another thing. I have come after them and made repair, where they have left not one stone on a stone, but they would have the rabbit out of hiding, to please the yelping dogs. The gaps, I mean, no one has seen them made or heard them made, but at spring mending time, we find them there. Sounds familiar? I let my neighbor know beyond the hill, and on a day we meet to walk the line and set the wall between us once again. We keep the wall between us as we go. To each the boulders that have fallen to each, and some are loaves and some so nearly balls, we have to use a spell to make them balance. Stay where you are until our backs are turned. We wear our fingers rough with handling them. Oh, just another kind of outdoor game, one on a side. It comes to little more. There where it is, we do not need the wall. He is all pine, and I am apple orchard. My apple trees will never get across and eat the cones under his pines, I tell him. He only says, good fences make good neighbors. Spring is the mischief in me, and I wonder if I could put a notion in his head. Why do they make good neighbors? Isn't it where there are cows? But here there are no cows. Before I built a wall, I'd ask to know what I was walling in or walling out, and to whom I was like to give offense. Something there is that doesn't love a wall, that wants it down. I could say elves to him, but it's not elves exactly, and I'd rather he said it for himself. I see him there, bringing a stone grasped firmly by the top in each hand like an old stone savage armed. He moves in darkness, as it seems to me, not of woods only, and the shade of trees. He will not go behind his father's saying, and he likes having thought of it so well, he says it again. Good fences make good neighbors. So bear with me. This poem, Easter's coming, as we all know. April is just a month full of celebrations. And this poem is about how when springtime comes, your mood can just suddenly lift without any reason. It's just the fact that there's more light in the sky, and that's a very happy feeling. So this is called Easter Sunday. And it starts with a quote from James Russell Lowell. Joy comes, grief goes, we know not how. After a rigid winter, with too many days spent in classrooms, the faint disturbance of birds disturbs the window sills. Trees open their mouths, fine-cut leaves cup air, careful the way a woman slides a hand beneath her child's oval skull and lifts his face to hers. I have been too loyal to grief. I have given corners to darkness, allowed myself to think love shrinks, cold. Now when sorrow answers, it doesn't matter. I tell my own stories, place colored eggs under shrubs, behind stones, coddle a few in a flower pot. One by one, children take them back, heads, tempera bulbs, in morning's convocation. Joy scrambles sadness. Lord, break this day over my head. Light sticks to me like yoke. Happy National Poetry Month. I hope to see you out at some of our events. And thank you very much, Mayor.
Thank you, Ms. Goss. Doing a wonderful job. As I previously stated, thank you for sharing with us those 3 poems this evening. And this proclamation is for you to take home. And thank you for arranging the Beowulf live on YouTube. All right, thank you. One more round of applause for Ms. Goss. Next on our agenda is our closed session report. I'd like to call on our town attorney, Mr. Robert Schultz, for that.
Yes, good evening. Prior to tonight's regular council or special council meeting, councilmen's closed session to discuss labor negotiations. In regards to labor negotiations, the labor negotiating parties are the town and the POA. As to this labor negotiation matter, no action was taken that requires reporting under the Brown Act.
Thank you, Mr. Schultz. At this time, I'd like to request those in attendance, if you'd like to speak on an item which is not on the agenda, to fill out a speaker card. And we will move on to verbal communications here now, since we have no consent calendar. I do not have any speaker cards for anything that is not on the agenda, so we will close verbal communications. We'll move on to our first public hearing. And our first public hearing is Architecture and Site Application S-13-071 and S-13-080. The property location is 16560 Shannon Road. The property owner applicant is JG Building LLC. We are reconsidering an appeal of the decision of the Planning Commission decision denying a request to demolish a pre-1941 single-family residence and construct 2 new single-family residences on property zoned R18. So at this time, I would like to defer to Ms. Erin Walters for the staff report.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and council members. The architecture and site applications tonight are being reconsidered by the Town Council. Per council policy, this reconsideration will be the full hearing of this matter as if it would be considered for the first time. On January 8th, the applicant presented these 3 applications to the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission approved the subdivision for the property, but denied both architecture and site applications due to concerns regarding neighborhood compatibility regarding mass, the appropriateness of the 2-story home at this location, and also concerns regarding the size of the proposed home at Lot 2 being 148 square feet larger than the next largest home in the neighborhood. The project was then appealed on January 10th by the applicant, claiming that the commission erred in stating that the proposed projects were not compatible. By the applicant claiming the commission had erred in stating that the proposed projects were not compatible with an immediate neighborhood. The appellant also has other claims that are attached in the staff report and will be presented this evening. As a part of the addendum received in Town Council's packet on March 3rd, the appellant has submitted a modified plan for the home on Lot 2. The reduction in square footage is achieved by reducing the overall house by a foot at each elevation, therefore reducing it by 158 square feet. By reducing the square footage, the proposed home will no longer be the largest in the immediate neighborhood. Rather, the modified home on Lot 2 would still be the second largest at FAR in the immediate neighborhood, and the proposed house on Lot 1 would be the largest FAR in the immediate neighborhood. Staff believes the revised plans have minimal effect on the application, therefore staff does not feel that it is new information that would trigger a remand to Planning Commission for this specific point. You've also received a desk item this evening, which includes a response to council inquiries and also has a copy of the applicant's PowerPoint presentation. This concludes staff's presentation, and staff is available for questions.
Thank you, Ms. Walters. Are there members of council with questions? Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. Ms. Walters, I had a question regarding the desk item, the top of page 2, the inquiry at number 2 and the response. And the inquiry was how many units could be built on the 5.26 acres. And I confess I'm always confused at the staff's response to that question because we have 2 different measures. We have 5 units per acre under the general plan, then we have lot sizes and frontages that are required, and then we also have a zoning. And I'm curious, if you were to take the 5.26 acres and develop it as R18, how many houses would you get?
Based on what is developed next to it in a similar lot formation with a cul-de-sac, and not knowing the specifics to those dimensions, but we found that approximately 17 units could be developed on that property.
And that's using the R18 zoning?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Any more questions for staff? Councilmember Brzezinski?
Thank you. On page 5 of the staff report, the question related to the height of the church north of the specific property. Would you explain the last two sentences? Residential design guidelines state some neighborhoods have distinct character and scale, while others are more mixed and transitional. And then the guidelines also state aberrations will not be considered when analyzing a neighborhood. What are considered aberrations?
That's a good question. The church could be considered an aberration because it's not in every planned area. It's not doesn't happen all over the place. It's unique in the setting there. However, there's also neighborhood compatibility with size and massing. So in that case, the church probably would fall under that definition.
Further questions of staff? Any disclosures of council? Councilmember Spector.
Yes, I met with the appellant.
Any other? Councilmember Brzezinski?
I met with the appellant a number of weeks ago, and I also visited the property 2 times since, the last time being today.
Any others? Myself, I drove by the property today to review the story poles and the site once again. So at this point in time, I'd like to close the ask the applicant to come forward to state your point of view.
Stop that one. You could go back. You don't need that yet. Thanks. Okay. Good evening. As the applicant and appellant and property owner of 16560 Shannon Road, I'd like to start by thanking the Town Council for the opportunity to present these applications before you tonight. The benefits that these applications bring to the town of Los Gatos are well documented and have been discussed with each of you. Benefits such as property annexation from county into town for improved health and safety services, replacing an old home in disrepair with the well-designed single-family homes walking distance to schools and parks, dedication of over 2,000 square feet for future street improvements, and of course, town, school, and park fees. But these benefits aren't really at the issue tonight. Per town policy, an applicant on appeal must demonstrate that the Planning Commission erred in its decision or provide new information that wasn't previously available. This policy has been made very clear to me, so that is what I'm forced to focus on this evening. Slide 1. Webster's dictionary defines the word error as an act involving an unintentional deviation from truth or accuracy. Now, the Planning Commission's act of denying these applications was derived from a deviation from the truth of accurate information. I believe this error was unintentional, but nonetheless an error. The Commission based its denial on information it believed to be correct, but was not. Information such as, quote, our hands get tied when we look at the immediate neighborhood and adjacent homes, and they're all single story. It's a quote from the transcript. So let's go to slide 2, please. There are, in fact, 2 two-story homes in the immediate neighborhood. There's another 2 to 3 adjacent to the immediate neighborhood, and there's, in fact, over 27 in the surrounding neighborhood. So you can go to the next one. A different commissioner stated on the record that this property is, quote, very close to the county, and the county did some awful things in that neighborhood, so I don't pay attention to those homes. Now, the commissioner is referring to the larger 2-story homes in and around the immediate neighborhood. Well, in fact, this entire immediate neighborhood is comprised of county parcel units, other than the church across the street, of course, and our property, which has been annexed in. And in fact, the largest 2-story homes in the surrounding area happen to be along Inglewood, which is all town property. So with all this focus on the immediate neighborhood guideline, I think we should take another look at it. Thanks. This diagram below illustrates the town's interpretation of the immediate neighborhood in standard subdivisions. There are several factors in determining an immediate neighborhood when this diagram may not be applicable. Now, it's evident that this guideline isn't applicable because the proposed homes exist in an area that not only isn't a standard subdivision, it's just about the furthest thing from one. There's a church, a fire department, a school, park, homes on county property, and homes in the town, like our property. Next slide, please. This part of the design guidelines goes on to say that common sense should be used when applying the diagram to specific site context. If in doubt, consult town staff for guidance. Now, town staff was not consulted for guidance by any member of the commission, and it's well documented in the record that they had plenty of doubt regarding this guideline, such as how to address the church across the street or the county properties all throughout. Or, in fact, if they're even able to look outside the immediate neighborhood. Now, if they were to consult staff, as the guideline instructs them to do, here's the guidance that they would have received. Staff found that the proposed residences comply with the residential design guides and are compatible with the neighborhood in terms of mass, scale, and materials. They went on to recommend granting approval of architecture and site. Webster's dictionary goes on to state an error is an act through deficiency or accident which departs from or fails to achieve what should be done. Now, what should be done on any application before any planning commission in any city or any town is that findings must be made to deny or approve any application. Let's see. The State of California Planning Commission Handbook states that a commission must adopt written findings explaining the factual reasons for its decision. Now, this is an excerpt from the minutes from the Planning Commission hearing on the 8th, where the required findings were indeed found to approve our subdivision. But if you notice, there's no mention of any written findings. Now, in the transcript and in a resolution, it does state that a planning commissioner is denying the applications due to the fact that they're two-story homes. Next slide, please. So findings must be supported by evidence in the hearing record, testimony, reports, environmental, whatnot, and it should not contain unsupported documents. Now, we already heard that the staff supported the application. One more. Now, what else did they have? One more, please. Well, there's the town consulting architect, and he states that the two homes are well designed, are similar in scale to other nearby two-story homes, and are compatible in scale with the large church structure across Shannon Road. I have no recommendations for changes to the proposed design. And the only public testimony afforded to the Planning Commission came in both written and verbal record in support of approving the applications. There was zero neighborhood opposition. So this brings us back to the findings. Back to the State of California Planning Commissioner's Handbook. It talks about legal requirements. A commissioner must keep basic legal requirements in mind. Is the proposal consistent with the general plan? Does it meet applicable zoning and subdivision ordinance requirements? And is the commission's decision supported by findings of fact based on substantial evidence in the record? Now, all substantial evidence, reports, testimony on record with which the Planning Commission based its decision upon recommended approval or supported the approval of this application, yet they were denied. Not on fact-based findings, but rather their opinion, which was derived from inaccurate information. This meets the very definition of the word error per Webster's dictionary. Per the same definition, I concede that this error was accidental or unintentional, but it was an error nonetheless. Now, in closing, I'd like to go on record that I believe that this Town of Los Gatos has a very good planning commission, a commission well-suited and capable of tackling many difficult and controversial applications before it now and in the future. However, they did unintentionally miss the mark on this one. This can happen on occasion, and the beauty of the town's policies and procedures are such that this town council can rectify it. This council can uphold the recommended findings on record, grant the appeal, and approve these applications. And that is what I respectfully ask for your consideration tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pinn. Are there any questions of council of the applicant? Seeing none, I don't have any speaker cards in my hand. If anybody wishes to speak on this matter, please get a card to the clerk. Oh. Just Mr. Pinn's card so far is? That's the one. Okay.
Lee Quintana, 5 Palm Avenue. Just wanted to make a couple of comments. At the last hearing on this for reconsideration, the flexibility of the guidelines was discussed, and it was stated that they were written such to provide flexibility. And I agree, they were. However, flexibility is somewhat of a two-edged sword. The more flexibility you put into a document, the greater the possibility that what is determined will fall within the flexibility, that flexibility. And I think that's what the Planning Commission did, as I think Councilperson Jensen mentioned last time. Just because you don't agree with the conclusion does not mean that the conclusion was made in error. And I believe that's the case here, that the Planning Commission made their decisions well-based within the flexibility of the design guidelines. With the question to the church, again, that I don't believe it was an error that the Planning Commission decided not to consider that. It is a totally different land use and therefore not very easily equated. So I don't think it was an error. However, I would make the comment that when I drove by today, I was surprised that, to me, it felt like the two houses were more massive than the church itself, even though the church is taller and bigger. But the design of the church and the setbacks make it appear less massive. Standard subdivisions. This is a standard subdivision that this is in. It is not a PD, and I'm sure if you went back and looked at the records, it would be a regular subdivision. It meets all the subdivision applications, both for this particular two-lot subdivision and the area around it. And the other comment I'd like to make is that the Planning Commission's testimony, my understanding, is part of the public record, and their reasoning for denying it was based on various considerations of ANS issues. In addition, I find that if it really is the intent of the council that all new houses can be two-story houses, then that's a policy issue that needs to be addressed. But I don't think it's appropriate to address it for this particular application, since that isn't a standing policy of the town at this point.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers on this subject? Seeing none, Mr. Pinn, you have 5 more minutes if you'd like to address any of the comments made by the speaker, the previous speaker.
Sure, thank you. I never said that the Planning Commission erred regarding not or exempting the church from their decision. I simply stated that they weren't sure whether they should or not. It's in the record. And in those times of doubt, the guideline states to consult staff or potentially the town architect, who both agreed that the massing of these homes meet just fine with the church's massing. With regard to that, if you did happen to go by there, like some of you did again today, which I've done several times since, you'll notice that the story poles are for the new 2-story homes are actually exactly the same height as the current structure that was built long ago. It's an older home where it's got a step up, kind of a porch, and then it's got kind of a high plate, and then a very steep pitched roof. So the new proposed homes are in fact exactly the same size as the current one that's been there. So I guess lastly, I could put up, we went out and got some signatures from some of the neighbors. You don't have to do it if you don't want, but there's about 12 people that have signed a document stating that they agree with as a resident of the Shannon Road neighborhood, I support the proposed project, and I do not support the direction of the Los Gatos Planning Commission to limit this use to single-story homes. And that's not really happening, but also in rebuttal here, two-story homes on this location are allowed, and it's been documented that they do meet the guidelines and the zoning regulations and rules, and really it should be considered. Thank you so much.
Mr. Pinn,
Yes, sir.
I have a question for you, and this is for the public to hear, but you mentioned the height of the two new proposed homes is equal to the existing height of the current home on the property.
Right.
What is that height in feet and inches off the top of your head?
I don't know, to be honest. It's 26 feet, perhaps. I don't know.
Okay.
Maybe staff, maybe Aaron could help me with that one. It's
I think it's like 25.4, if my memory serves me correct, but
yeah.
the other question I have is, and maybe staff can address this, potentially there could have been a home, potentially, assuming that it passed A&S and such DRC approvals, whatever, up to 36 feet. Am I correct on that?
36 feet in height, is that what?
Yes.
In that zoning, it's allowed to get up to 30 as a maximum height.
Okay. Thank you. So that ends my questions. Are there any other questions for the speaker? Seeing none, we will close the public hearing and move on to council discussion or possible motions. Councilmember Brzezinski.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do believe that our reconsideration is appropriate at this time, and in reviewing the Planning Commission's verbatim, I found that there was some confusion on a number of areas because it's kind of a mixed environment there at La Chiquita and Shannon. And I think that as I went back to the property and drove that neighborhood again, I think that it's quite possible for us to take even the diagram in our residential design guidelines that has been used to not facilitate us two-story homes in that site. As I look at it in context, it seems to me that this is a neighborhood that does have two-story homes. And I think the Plan Commission focused on the diagram and then focused on the concept of single-story, but I don't think that they in any way, shape, or form intentionally erred. I do think it was a question of looking at the guidelines and then coming to an interpretation. And as I look at the guidelines and as I review what appears to be the status of that property, I think that we have grounds to determine that you could build two-story homes on that property, and that everything leading up to this point probably would have had one of those homes not been the largest in the neighborhood, we probably would have moved this thing through really quickly. And because it has allowed us to have this discussion, I think it's also allowed us to be more clear in the way we define the neighborhood, not just the immediate neighborhood, but the extended neighborhood. So I am very open to considering a reappraisal of the applicant's appeal, and to say that I have comfort in making a motion for purposes of discussion. And the motion would be to adopt the resolution granting the appeal, which is attachment 9, and make the required findings and considerations and approve the Ark and Site application S13071 and S13080, subject to the conditions in attachment 6 and the development plans attachment 10. And from my perspective, the attachment 9 was the granting of the new consideration. But again, I open this for discussion, not as conclusion. My sense is this, that the Planning Commission, in its attempt to be rigorous in its interpretation, did what they thought we expected. And with that, they were constrained, therefore, in what they felt they could comfortably decide. This isn't a decision to grant all two-story applications. It has nothing to do with that. It has something to do with the context of the neighborhood and the fact that there is in this neighborhood a mix of one- and two-story homes. By the way, I am discounting the issue that it's county versus town in this sense. We're asking for compatibility with the neighborhood, and as I look at that neighborhood, it is evolving, but I think it's evolving in a relatively attractive way. When you're looking at some of the homes that are remnants of the earlier properties, the earlier county properties, but as I'm seeing some of the evolution, not every design is perfect by any means, but I think you see a neighborhood that is pretty compatible to the application that's been in front of us. So that's the motion I'll make, and if there's a second, then we can discuss.
Before I ask for a second, I have a couple questions of staff. Ms. Walters, maybe you can answer this. The motion that Mr. Przinski made, does that include in the attachments the home with the reduced square footage on Lot 2, I guess is what we would refer to it as?
You could include that in the motion.
That would be included.
Okay. The other question I had of staff was, previously in the design, there was a request made by staff to put in hardscaping sidewalks and around the property. Could you explain what the current status of that is, or is that still being requested of the applicant?
At the time the applications were made, it was requested of the applicant in the conditions of approval to dedicate as well as install the improvements, the street improvements. But since that time, we've met with the Director of Public Works, and because of the conditions that are surrounding this site, we will just have them dedicate and put the money towards the in lieu fee and not actually install. And that could be a modified condition.
Okay. So would that have to be put into the motion made by Councilmember Przinski?
While they're researching this particular piece of language, I do think that when you look at that neighborhood, like a number of the neighborhoods that have evolved, Filmer, for example, not all improvements are enacted when a new project comes forward, but for purposes of a future, when the neighborhood does evolve towards, let's say, rather than rather than basically rolled curbs comes to curb and sidewalk, then that would be installed at that time. My understanding is if we secure a future guarantee of that, then that would be sufficient. I would include that in the motion.
Okay. Staff has a response?
Yes, it could be formally put into the motion, or it could be just done administratively. And if you would like to put it in the motion, it would be combining condition 44 and 47 so that there would be a new condition which engineering staff has prepared that would allow the dedication and then not the actual installation, but pay for the in lieu.
All right, so it's dedicated, but then the pay, at least it wasn't the manager's name tag. The dedication would be for a future time when it is appropriate for the rest of the neighborhood. I would prefer that.
And for the public's clarification, the section of those conditions that Ms. Walters referenced is in the engineering division section that leads off with to the satisfaction of the Director of Parks and Public Works. So based on the council discussion and motion, that would drive what defines satisfaction of the director in applying those two conditions. Or you could have the engineering staff read the combined new condition and it could be inserted.
Another question that comes to mind, is there some kind of a dollar amount associated with that gets put into a fund in lieu of for the future improvements? How does that work?
Mr. Mayor, Matt Morley, Director of Parks and Public Works. So the in lieu fee would go into a fund that we would use for sidewalk improvements throughout the town, but it would be recorded that we have collected that for this particular property, so that when the neighborhood is ready for it, we could do those improvements.
Thank you, Mr. Morley. Is there any other discussion, or Councilmember McNutt?
Thank you, Mayor. I do think we need to get a second out before this conversation goes too much farther, so I will do that. And the only, and I had a couple questions, which the mayor's already covered. And the only statement I have is my opinion hasn't changed from the last time we heard this, when I wanted to grant the appeal, because I do feel that the Planning Commission discussion of the little chart got too focused on the little chart and not on the intent of residential design guidelines. It all comes down to, why do we care how high a house is? Well, usually it's because we have neighbors who are opposing, they're concerned about privacy, they're concerned about loss of view, and then we as a community are concerned about compatibility in the neighborhood. In this particular case, there are no concerns about privacy, there are no concerns about view interruption. There are concerns among decision makers about compatibility, and from my perspective, it is compatible because of the number of two-story homes in the neighborhood, as well as the church, the fire station, Shir Hadash, and other buildings that are within a few steps of where these homes will be. So I am supportive of the granting the appeal as I was the last time. Thank you.
So we have a motion and a second. Further discussion? Vice Mayor.
I won't be supporting the motion because I, too, am of the opinion that I was at the last meeting. I didn't support the reconsideration. I don't think there was an error by the Planning Commission. I think that they interpreted the residential guidelines in a reasonable manner. I don't think we have new information. It's the same information we had at our last meeting. I was interested, and I wanted to comment specifically on a couple of things that Mr. Pinn presented in his PowerPoint. The first one was the quote that, or the implication by Mr. Pinn, that the Planning Commission was supposed to consult with the town staff for guidance. That sentence is in there for developers, not for the Planning Commission. The staff gives the Planning Commission information, and then the Planning Commission independently makes a decision. So the Planning Commission is in no way obligated to consult the staff. The second one was the quote from Larry Cannon, indicating that Mr. Cannon was pleased with the design. Mr. Cannon is a consultant only, and his imprimatur on a design does not guarantee it approval either at the Planning Commission level or at the Town Council level. So I will not be supporting the motion.
Any further discussion? Councilmember Spector.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I actually enjoyed the appellant's presentation. Not that I disagree with the Vice Mayor, but I enjoyed the presentation. However, when I consider an appeal, I do not look to what I would do if I were the first body considering the application. This probably would be one I'd have to give a lot of thought to. But I'm not the one making the first level of decision. The Planning Commission was. And I'm looking to see if the Planning Commission erred. And I do not believe they did. There was a Planning Commission statement that their hands are tied, and I agree with the council member, I think it was Mr. Brzezinski, who said that's not true, that the Planning Commission has facts, and they can take the residential guidelines and apply those facts to those guidelines and come up with a decision. Their hands are not tied. That being said, the decision they made, the residential guidelines that they cited, the facts that they referenced. All of those were findings, as the appellant was referencing. Those were findings, and they were not in error.
So it's my turn. This particular project brought forth to me a lot of confusion. It's a very interesting situation. And that's why I went out there today and looked at it again, and I looked at the whole neighborhood again. I drove all the way around there and tried to absorb what I felt was the neighborhood. And being a resident of that neighborhood and living there for almost 27, 28 years, and driving by there all the time, I've seen the changes that have occurred. I've seen the generations of houses that have gone up in there. And thinking of the history of the post-World War II, one-story, three-bedroom, one-bath homes on a 10,000 square foot lot, and then seeing the revisions during the 60s, 70s, 80s of these homes to accommodate people's lifestyles during those periods, and seeing the transition of the area, some for better, some for worse. But overall, the result is it has a theme going on there. And whether the parcel is in the county or the town, to me, I think it's important to look at what theme is there. Being that this particular property was annexed to the town because of the subdivision application, it's very challenging to see. I see both sides of the argument here. The difficulty I see is, okay, so we have this large parcel and we subdivide it. If the direction was originally, well, you cannot subdivide that property, you have to kind of just build one house on that lot and that's it. I could see, trying to maintain somewhat of a theme of what has been going on in that neighborhood all along, which is you either build a really, really big two-story home on one lot, or you have an old one-story home that has a very large yard that in a different time, in a different era, was the way they built the houses back then. And maybe that house has had some improvements and maybe it hasn't. But as we look forward and as we look at the fact that this property has been annexed to the town and it does fit within what I see is our floor area ratio guidelines, being that, yes, it's not the 17 to 24%, which has been previously established by what's been going on in the county over the years. But the fact that it still is within our guidelines, our Los Gatos guidelines, being that this has been annexed to Los Gatos, I don't see any reason to deny the applicant his project moving forward due to a large floor area ratio. When I went out there and I looked at the property today and I looked at the story poles, I stood back across the street and I just thought to myself, what is the big deal? I asked staff a whole bunch of questions prior to the meeting, of which they answered, and I'm very grateful for their answers. It was very informative, and I respect all the work that the Planning Commission has done on this and all the work that the staff has done on this. But quite honestly, I just don't see a reason on this particular application not to include the information of the what has happened in the county in the past, the whole definition of the neighborhood, I guess, as opposed to looking at it in terms of, well, this is what Los Gatos does, and right next door this is what the county does, and this is what it has to be. I asked the question about the sidewalks because I felt like, okay, you're going to subdivide this lot and you're going to put in hardscaping around it, but there's no hardscaping in the whole area. If the town were to take an approach someday where we were going to take on a project to put in hardscaping and sidewalks and driveways and all those things, then I would see that as being beneficial to the whole area potentially. But at this point in time, I think that would take away from the look of it and the kind of country, county, rural feel, however you want to describe it, that has been going on in this neighborhood for a long time. So I'm going to support the motion because I feel that looking at what could be there, what makes sense that could be there, and trying to establish whether or not you could put a two-story home, the question raised by the speaker as a matter of policy. I don't know if we have to revisit that policy or not. I'm not taking that into consideration on this application. What I am taking into consideration is if someone in that neighborhood was going to put a second story on their home or extensively remodel their home, they would be annexed by the town. I think that's the approach that happens. And they would be in the same boat as this applicant. And I don't know if they would get the same kind of scrutiny that this applicant received. Last but not least, I want to make one comment on two-story versus one-story. And in the past, there was a subdivision along Shannon, and I think they chose to go underground with their second story. And I don't know how long ago that was, maybe 15 years ago. But looking at a requirement to say, oh, if you want to build a second story, you need to go underground, I don't think is realistic. I think these days when people choose to go underground, they go underground and they go above ground, so they end up with 3 stories in an even larger home. So I think, I appreciate, again, the work of the Planning Commission and the staff on this, but I will be supporting the motion on the basis that I see this as a good project and taking into consideration what makes sense in that location. It was a very difficult decision for me to make. It required a lot of analysis, but that's where I am on this issue. So I'll call the question. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
So it passes 3-2. And we will move on to our next public hearing. It's conditional use application U-13-020, architecture and site application S-13-050, property location 16268 Los Gatos Boulevard, property owner Fox Creek Fund LLC, and the applicant is Gary Colsat. And we are considering the appeal of the Planning Commission decision approving a request to demolish an existing commercial building and to construct a new office building on property zoned C1. And our staff report is being provided by Ms. Suzanne Avila.
Okay, the project site is located on the east side of Los Gatos Boulevard, 2 parcels south of Shannon Road. The building on the site was constructed in the 1940s, and it has been used for commercial purposes since 1976. It is currently vacant. It has been vacant since the current property owner purchased the property in February 2013. The site's about 19,000 square feet, which is about 0.44 of an acre, so a little bit less than half an acre. It's zone C1. The retail building to the north is also of the same zoning. The church, which surrounds the property on the rear and the east, so it would be the south and the east sides of the property, is in an R1 zone. The properties across the street are zoned commercial and residential. We have residential and office uses directly across Los Gatos Boulevard. There is a shared driveway along most of the side property line. It is used to access the commercial building on the corner of Shannon and Los Gatos Boulevard, as well as the project site. That's along most of the north property line. The applicant is requesting approval of a conditional use permit for the new office building and an architecture and site application to demolish the existing building and construct the new building that they're proposing. The project was considered by the Planning Commission on October 23rd, 2013. The commission approved the applications at that time with some added conditions requiring the second floor to be set back and 2 balconies added on each side, and then the roof to be changed from metal to tile. That decision was appealed by the owners of the adjacent commercial property, and the appeal was considered by the council on December 16th, 2013, where the matter was remanded to the Planning Commission for further consideration of increasing the front setback, possible reduction in the building size, and/or stepping back of the second floor. The applicant revised the plans. Those plans were considered by the Planning Commission on February 26, 2014, at which time the Planning Commission approved the applications, and that decision was appealed on March 10th. The modifications that have been made to the plans include increasing the front setback by 10 feet. The second floor was recessed and the balconies were added as recommended by the Planning Commission. The roofing material change was made as well. And the building size was reduced to about 6,800 square feet, which is about 235 square feet less than when the council last saw the project. Council's options this evening are to deny the appeal and approve the applications, grant the appeal and remand to Planning Commission if you feel further revisions are necessary, or to grant the appeal and deny the project. This concludes staff's report, and staff is available if you have any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions of staff? Are there any disclosures? Councilmember Brzezinski?
Yes, I met with the applicant about a week or so ago to understand the further revisions that were made in the plan.
Vice Mayor?
I met with Marshall Smith shortly after the February Planning Commission meeting at the property, and I recently met with the applicant and his architect, and I am walking or driving by the property on a daily basis.
Councilmember Spector?
Thank you. I met with the applicant and his architect.
Councilmember McNutt?
I had a phone conversation with the applicant and visited the site to see the change in the story poles.
And I also met with the applicant this past week at their location of business. So after our disclosures, we will invite the applicant up to present the appellant up to present your case. I'd like to remind those who are in attendance, if you would like to fill out a speaker card, if you have anything to say on this matter, please fill out a speaker card and hand it to the clerk. Mr. Smith, you could please come forward.
Thank you. Honorable Mayor and members of the Town Council, I'm Marshall Smith. I live in Los Gatos, as do my brothers Marlon and Myron. We own the property located on the corner of Los Gatos Boulevard and Shannon Road, immediately north and adjacent to the subject property of 16268 Los Gatos Boulevard. Our property has been in our family for 2 generations. We lived and grew up on the property. We've appealed this twice, and we filed both appeals. Were not about winning or losing. It's about what we feel is right thing to do for the future of Los Gatos Boulevard and the community. To pay $1,800 so that I can stand here and present to you our feelings about what we think is right for the boulevard, when the staff is clearly against what we think about the boulevard, and after the Planning Commissions gave us 3 minutes to present a complicated issue and then vote 6-1 to approve the project without any real consideration of what we presented. The odds are against us, and it took some time for us to decide that we should file the appeal. It is unfortunate that we are at this point because as business owners we understand delays cost money. My brothers and I have reached out to the applicant on several occasions. Recently we had a dialogue with the architect about the property. We discussed pushing the building back an additional 10 feet with 1 row of parking in front. Mr. Cosette indicated that even with the additional parking in front, the additional 10-foot setback would require eliminating 2 to 3 parking spaces, thereby forcing a reduction in the building size by approximately 470 to 705 feet. Unfortunately, none of these ideas were incorporated in the current design. There's never been any kind of neighborhood meeting regarding this project. Perhaps if there had been, we may have been able to avoid some time delays and achieve an acceptable solution for all parties. We are concerned because this project will set a precedent for staff, the consulting architect, and the Planning Commission to direct future applicants to a design bias for not only this section of the boulevard, but for the entire boulevard. We believe this is not in the best interest of the community. With this precedent, the 2 buildings immediately to the south, owned by the church, could be developed with the same size structure, creating a tunnel effect, and any view of the mountains from the street will be lost. We feel that there has been mistakes made on the design of new buildings along the boulevard over the years, and even recently on new development south of Blossom Hill Road, where projects have turned their backs to the boulevard. These concerns primarily focus on the site layout, specifically the front setback from the boulevard, and the issues of providing at least limited parking in the front of the buildings. We should learn important lessons from these mistakes. Forcing all of the parking to be located behind new commercial buildings will create false front doors facing the boulevard that are never or rarely used. Virtually all access and pedestrian activity will be from the back of the buildings. This is certainly not neighborhood or community-friendly design. The Cornerstone Shopping Center has virtually all of its parking in the front of the shopping center and has received many accolades from the town for being a well-designed shopping center. The Boulevard Commercial Design Guidelines are clearly address the issue in the introduction of Section 5A, page 41. We believe that the concept envisioned by the guidelines was to avoid creating seas of poorly designed parking lots, as you see on El Camino and Stevens Creek Boulevards. Locating parking behind the buildings was never intended to be an edict for new development. In fact, what the commercial guidelines say in Section 5A24, page 43, parking lots should be located behind or to the side of buildings facing Los Gatos Boulevard whenever possible. With the word should, not shall, and whenever possible, it's hard to understand how staff, consulting architect, and planning commission are interpreting the council's direction on the project. Nowhere in the Los Gatos Boulevard plan or the commercial design guidelines does it say that all parking is required to be located behind the buildings. From the direction of staff, the consulting architect, and the planning commission, the applicant feels that he's following the Los Gatos Boulevard plan and commercial design guidelines. The commercial design guidelines, section 5A, page 41 states, given the small-scale character of the town and close adjacency of residential neighborhoods to the boulevard, large building users be expected to design their project to a smaller scale than might be their standard practice in other communities. The Los Gatos Boulevard plan further states uses of the Los Gatos Boulevard south of Shannon Road shall be for residential or office use. Existing non-residential uses shall not be intensified. With a reduced setback and parking behind the building, this building will destroy the visual continuity of the open space associated with this area and will turn its back on the boulevard, not from an architectural perspective, but from a use and functional perspective. The commercial design guidelines state accommodate auto-oriented uses while maintaining a high degree of human scale and appeal. The town council previously concurred with our concerns on these points. While we appreciate the increased setback of approximately 10 feet proposed by the applicant, we feel this is a token gesture, so the project could be approved as a reasonable compromise, but it misses the point about neighborhood setback compatibility and about parking in front. There are many statements in Section 5 of the guidelines that are on point to this issue of parking and boulevard site design. This building should reflect the setback of the church as well as the fact that the church has parking in front of the building. Our concerns are all about neighborhood context and neighborhood compatibility. The proposed building has an entry facing the boulevard, but all parking is behind, underneath, with some parking on the side of the building. There's no street parking allowed on this two-lane stretch of the boulevard. The front entrance will be seldom used. If visitors do try to use the front entrance, they will have to walk all the way around the building, and there's no sidewalk, and they will have to avoid the cars that will be entering or leaving the common driveway used by the new building and our building. We anticipate that all employees and visitors will enter from the back of the building. That's not a pedestrian or neighborhood-friendly design. Previously, the Boulevard charrettes, also known as community meetings, there were presentations illustrating the use of frontage driveways to create a pedestrian-friendly atmosphere of the buildings facing the boulevard. This arrangement allows vehicles to drive in and park in front of the building without impeding traffic movement and is buffered from the street with a wide, dense landscape buffer. There are larger parking areas located behind the building similar to the church. The same frontage is possible on this site proposed building with a single row of parking. We believe that is a good design change for the proposed building, would be good for the community because it will be sensitive to the transition and character of the area. The residents of Los Gatos would prefer a building with a low visual impact on the boulevard. Some of the members of the Planning Commission originally expressed their concern for having this building placed so close to the boulevard. However, when the Commission more recently considered the project, they did not even discuss the possibility of row parking in front because, as one commissioner commented, putting parking in front of the building isn't something we should consider. We believe that the Commission was reacting to individual council comments as council direction. Their comments, both pro and con, about the building setback and limited parking in front of the building are well founded and should have been exhausted so they could assist the council when deliberating our appeal. We believe that town council should either remand the application back to the planning commission with direction to review a project with one row of parking in front of the building and reduce the size of the building accordingly and pull the front of the roof back preferably. Approve the project with a condition requiring one row of parking in front and reduce the size of the building accordingly and pull the front of the roof back. On behalf of the residents of the community, we thank you for considering our concerns, and I'll be happy to respond to any questions.
Any questions from council for the appellant? I have one question I just thought of from your presentation, which I also read the other day when you sent it to us. From your recollection, is there currently a sidewalk that begins in the area of the church parcel, the Calvary
Yes.
Church parcel,
Yes.
and continues to the corner where your property is located, or does the sidewalk disappear somewhere in that area?
No, I believe it goes all the way to Shannon Road.
So there would be a sidewalk in front of this proposed, and I see in the picture there is a sidewalk.
What I was referencing is there would be no walkway from the rear of the building around to the front of the building, if that's what you were
Okay, I did understand that, but I was
Okay,
just
sorry.
trying to recollect the front where the sidewalk was located.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
At this time, I'd like to call forward Mr. Gary Colsat, and that is the only card. Actually, I have another card, but anyone else who would like to come speak? Actually, Florian Barth, I believe, is coming forward. You have 3 minutes.
Honorable Mayor, council members, my name is Florian Barth, representing Fox Creek Fund property owner. Most appeals you're facing are likely by property owners who ask more, like we saw earlier, and maybe I should have taken some lesson and built out into the road and gone much larger. But we are the diametrically opposite. We are responding to the second appeal and trying to comply. We have complied with all the guidelines, and there was a mention that we just gave a token of suggestion of reducing the building a small part. This started out as an 8,000 square foot building. When it went through the staff review and we had to put our landscaping in, et cetera, and made the building really fit all the guidelines, we ended up with 7,500, then 7,200. Today we're at 6,800. So it's not something that we just try to give a little bit. We have given from day one, from last summer, and the polls have been up since last summer. After you granted the appeal, we moved the building back, first 8.5 feet, and then we squeezed every corner we could, trying to find another foot or 2 or 3, and we did find another 2 feet and made it 10 feet. Now we're 25 feet. We set the upstairs back, as recommended by the Planning Commission in the first cycle, 5 feet, and we moved that back another 1 foot to increase that. And of course, we reduced the building, as you know. We set up a meeting with the appellant after we made the revisions, trying to explain that we did the most we really could to make the building a functional building. At the end of the day, we all want a functional building. We did have to compromise a little bit on the stair and switch back some of it to squeeze it the way we did, but it is a functional building. The appellant wanted us to put parking in front. Parking in front would result in a one-way driveway where you have to back out. You will have to back either out into the boulevard or back out into the applicant's property. That is just not a good idea. You cannot turn around. It's a single driveway, and you would have to back out. We studied that. Our architect studied that for 2 days. We did some drawings. We did some studies on it, and we just thought that is certainly the wrong direction. After that, I reached out again to the applicant. We had another meeting after the appeal. As I said, studied it, and I called the applicant one more time and said, is there anything I can do? I'm willing to put glass in the corner to make it more transparent, to get more visibility to your building. And I was told I'd get a call back that night. I never got a call back. I called back 2 days later and requested what the verdict was. And it became apparent to me that I cannot fix it because the appellant wanted to change the guidelines. He wanted me to do something totally different than what the guidelines tell me to do. And that just did not make any sense and did not resonate with us. In fact, we went as far as, we received this letter today from the appellant, where the appellant writes about, why don't you reduce the second story on the front and make it a one-story roof? Our architect immediately, all day since the letter came in, we have studied, and we have some pictures which we can show if you're interested. We studied that. But I want to just urge you that this may not be the venue where we can fix the town's commercial standards or guidelines. I just cannot do it, nor can I fix the Planning Commission, who has twice approved that 6-1. I cannot change them and call them that they are twice in error, even though last time they were told, please carefully review it. One item which has frequently been missed, and that is that this is not retail. The applicant constantly compares it to retail space on the corner of Blossom Hill and Los Gatos Boulevard. This is not retail. This is office, and we have pictures of other office buildings on the boulevard. And Gary will, our architect, will, let me go ahead and talk about the compatibility. This is on Los Gatos Boulevard, a picture of an office building. All office buildings, and we marked them for you one by one, are close to the boulevard, have parking in the back. There's another example. This is literally right across the street, right to the boulevard, parking functions in the back. Here's another one, two-story building, very prominent, right on the boulevard, with a door on the boulevard, parking on the side or the back. The architect did another study for me just to see, are we that far off? Are we really that wrong? And here you see a bird's eye view which shows where you see the black asterisks or the black snowflakes. These are all buildings which are 25 feet or less close to the boulevard. And if you see, there's only literally 3 buildings which are not, which is the appellant's building, and it's the building next to it, the Artesian Wine Depot. If that is what we want the boulevard to look like, those 2 buildings, then I may be wrong. But I do not think that we should model the boulevard to for buildings which are in place and likely be removed in very short order. We should have a longer view and not focus on the Artesian Boulevard, which I know the buyer is looking at a redevelopment plan, and that may not be it. So as you go down, you can see these buildings, again, green highlighted are office. All the ones green highlighted are, as you see it, are all parking on the side or the back, just the way we did it. I do not believe parking in the front, driving into a dead end, and not being able to get out, having to back up 20, 30 feet. The lot is only 100 feet wide. 26 feet for the driveway, 20 feet setback on the other side. You have only about 40, 50 feet to actually park. So it means you have to go in, and you will have to back out either into the appellant's lot or back out into the boulevard. I just believe this would be a big mistake and a very poorly functional office building. Anything to add, Gary? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Barth. So you actually had up to 10 minutes. I stated only 3 minutes if you wanted more, but if you have nothing else to add at this point.
Actually, I do. I'm Gary Colside, architect, for the record. I just wanted to point out that the appellant is referring to the commercial design guidelines, and he is suggesting that we look at all of the guidelines, but he didn't exactly say all of the guidelines. When he cited 5.A.2.4, which is parking should be located behind or to the side of the building, which we are adhering to, when he said that that's not a must-have, it says the exception to this guide would be for projects that would block significant views to the surrounding hills. Well, we're not blocking any views to the hills, so we don't make that exception. And another location in the commercial design guidelines under Los Gatos Boulevard states that parking areas should be subservient to the buildings and their visual impact on the streetscape minimized. Again, that's what we're doing with this design. I really feel that this is not setting a precedent. It's actually following the rhythm and the patterns that are already existing. And we clearly shown with all these exhibits how many of the buildings are actually at 25 feet setback and with parking on the side and the rear. And we're following that. So we are, by definition, compatible with this neighborhood.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any further comments? The light is still green.
Didn't know, I thought we were out of time, but.
You.
There was, in the appeal, you may have seen it, it said council to review standard and guidelines, which I don't oppose. I welcome that those be reviewed, but this may not be the venue and not be the project to repair the commercial standards and guidelines. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the speakers? Seeing none, I'd like to invite the appellant to come back up and rebut. You have 5 minutes.
Parking in front, you wouldn't have to back out into the street or back into the easement area at all. There's a good example we presented before, which is down north of Lark Avenue, and you can have parking in front. It would be nicely buffered, and you could exit the parking and not have to back out anywhere. Also, you know, when we talk about a lot of these buildings that are within 25 feet of the street, they weren't built there that way. They got within 25 of the street because the street was widened. So, you know, the area there, in terms of this structure, is going to change the whole look of the boulevard, and it's going to set a precedent. And when we talk about it being an edict, you know, this is the guidelines, the commercial guidelines and the Los Gatos Boulevard plan doesn't say anything about requiring parking to be back behind all of the structures.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers on this topic? Seeing none, we will close the public hearing and look to council for discussion or motions. Councilmember Spector.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I should take what I said at the last hearing and just move it forward so I don't have to repeat myself. But when I consider appeals, I do not look at them as though I'm the person of the Planning Commission making the first call. I look to see if the Planning Commission erred. What I heard, and again, it was a very good presentation from the appellant. The appellants are doing extremely well with their presentations this evening. But what I heard were concerns with the boulevard plan and the boulevard design guidelines, concerns about the reality of entry from the back when we may have hope for entry from the front, concerns with things like the visual impact of a tunnel on the hillside. But those may be concerns about our guidelines and our plans, but I do not see them as errors on the part of the Planning Commission. And so I would not be able to make the finding to grant the appeal. So I am just going to go ahead and move that the town adopt a resolution, attachment 5, to deny the appeal and uphold the decision of the Planning Commission to approve the subject applications.
We have a motion. Councilmember McNutt.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Discussion. No further. Oh, Vice Mayor.
I wonder if the maker of the motion and the seconder would consider, with respect to the resolution that we're adopting, there is language in there that I didn't, which suggests that we're making a finding that Class A office building space is desired and that this particular parcel fits well into the boulevard. I didn't hear anything like that, so I wonder if you consider striking that because the motion, those findings weren't actually made.
Councilmember Spector.
If I could my answer is going to be probably, but I want to see what would be included. I'm going to attachment 5. And what part of attachment 5?
It's the second page. And it's the third paragraph, the third whereas. It now says, the council has determined that the planning commission did not err, I don't have a problem with that, in its decision in that the proposed office building is appropriately located. We did not make any finding, although there was some discussion, and is consistent with the commercial design guidelines. We have not made that finding. And it will enhance the Los Gatos Boulevard streetscape. We've not made that finding. And will provide needed Class A office space. We did not make that finding.
All right, the maker of the motion is amenable to eliminating the last clause and will provide needed Class A office space on the basis that that issue was never discussed before us, and I do not believe discussed before the Planning Commission. However, I think the other issues mentioned were actually touched upon. So I'll just get rid of the last clause, and will provide needed Class A office space.
Does the seconder of the motion also agree with that change?
So a period after the word streetscape?
Correct.
Yes.
All right, so we have an amended motion and amended second. Vice Mayor.
And I just wanted to comment because I had commented on the last application with respect to our role. I agree with Councilwoman Spector that we are reviewing the Planning Commission's actions to determine if there's error. In reviewing their last meeting in the transcript, I don't believe they were in error. I do believe that they followed the guidelines as we have them. As a former Planning Commissioner, I have asked for the Los Gatos Boulevard plan to be updated for as long as I can remember. It's on our priority agenda, I believe. It's about 20 years old now, and it obviously has shortcomings. I do appreciate that the applicant and his architect did work to move the building back, because I think that was the primary concern with the town council at the last appeal. So I appreciate that, and I'm very hopeful that with that, we'll have an improved look on the boulevard and not the tunnel that I think the council was afraid of. And I agree that this is not the venue to reconsider the guidelines, but it may be appropriate to reconsider them in the future. So I'll be supporting the motion.
Further discussion, Councilmember Brzezinski.
Yes, I do appreciate the fact that the maker of the motion was inclusive of those items other than the Class A office language, because those are some of the guidelines that we're using to make decisions in this regard. I have a great deal of faith in the Planning Commission and the Commission's determination in this particular case. And I also remind us that the Planning Commission is advisory to the Council, and that our job is more expansive than merely to agree or disagree that the Planning Commission was in error, or the other two issues that we need to look at, because we have the opportunity as council to broaden our interpretation for the benefit of the community. I also want to, though, recommend approval, because of the fact that I think in the dialogue that's taken place between the applicant and the appellant, through this entire period of time, there has been a real effort on the part of the applicant to accommodate the issues that were recommended by the Smith brothers, but also the recommendations from the Planning Commission that were a response to the Smith brothers. So to me, this is the way a project should work, that you get this continued dialogue until we come to a point where we can say that we've satisfied the needs of the community. And I do think that that's what has happened in this case. But I also want to commend the Smith brothers for their diligence and their focus on the boulevard plan, the issues of how we're going to continue to design the boulevard, the significance we place on the articulation of the boulevard so that we don't get a tunnel down the boulevard, that we do get
appropriate variation in what is presented to the boulevard. I think the question of the businesses, particularly retail businesses, that turn their back to the boulevard and then have false fronts, we had to tackle that with the Dome building. Because everything that was on Blossom Hill was going to be basically service stores. And we had to explicitly go back and change that because there was definitely a concern that what you had on the appearance on Blossom Hill with the building at Blossom Hill and the Boulevard was a false front with no articulation. They did some work with windows to increase the visibility, but it was an afterthought. And I would hope that we don't do that again. But at the same time, I think that in this particular case, this works, and we'll be very, very cognizant of the noticing that the Smith brothers brought to our attention as we proceed further. In addition, I don't think this sets precedent because every decision we make is de novo. And so we will approach each decision from this point on with that in mind, that this is a single set that we're approving, but we go forward with the next decision, keeping the issues that you brought to our attention in mind.
Any further discussion? I will weigh in. I would like to thank both the applicant and the Smith brothers for your very well vetting of this project. This is how the community ends up with an ultimately better result. Every parcel has its constraints, and this parcel obviously had some limitations which had to be addressed. And sometimes when the community goes through this process, those constraints become better addressed. Not all constraints can be addressed, but I think moving the building back was a very good decision. And looking forward, again, as Councilmember Brzezinski said, each project is evaluated on its own merits and that property's constraints, applying our town guidelines and rules. And that's how we deliberate all the time. So thank you, everyone, for coming in on this, and I'll call the question. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. It passes unanimously. We have one more item of business this evening, which is the discussion and direction regarding term limits for the town council. And we have a staff report.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. The mayor scheduled this item for consideration by the council, and staff is providing some background information. At present, the town of Los Gatos does not have term limits for its elected officials. The California Government Code provides that voters must determine whether elected officials are subject to term limits. And a ballot measure may be brought forward either by the citizens, or the council may propose a measure for the ballot as well. Staff conducted a survey of the other cities in Santa Clara County and found that the majority of the cities do indeed have term limits. If the council is interested in establishing term limits and putting a measure on the ballot, staff would ask for guidance on the details of such a measure, if that is the way the council would like to go. If there is to be a ballot measure, the next possible election would be the November 2014 election, and resolutions putting that ballot measure on would need to be submitted by August 8th, and that means that this council would need to act on that issue by your meeting on August 4th. And that completes staff's report.
Thank you, Ms. Jacobs. Does any member of council have questions for staff on this item? Councilmember Spector.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. For staff, I noted that Saratoga was the one entity that had an advisory measure and that they're now complying with. Did the council put that advisory measure on the ballot?
No, it would have been a measure put on by the voters, by the citizens.
Okay, and what about the other, I guess it's what, 14, 13 jurisdictions? Was that done by council or by the public?
Oh, I'm sorry. You're asking whether it was a resident initiative versus the council putting on the measure, and I do not have that information.
And do you have that information with regard to the other 13 jurisdictions?
I do not have the information, I'm
at all.
sorry.
Okay.
I did discuss the Saratoga unique circumstance with the city manager of Saratoga, and if I'm remembering correctly, it was a citizen initiative to put the advisory vote on. State law did not allow at that time a mandatory vote. That was a subsequent change. So general law cities were not allowed at that time. So that's why they've adopted an advisory. There's never been a move by the citizens or the council to make it an obligation because everybody's complied with it. All council members have complied with it.
Right, thank you. I thought it was very interesting. I thought that the staff's city's term limit survey was very interesting. And I would never have guessed that most cities have term limits, 2 consecutive terms, maybe because, you know, I live in a cave, but I didn't. This was surprising to me. But as my thought on it is that it would be something I would feel comfortable with if community members came forward with it as opposed to the council.
Vice Mayor.
I would say exactly the same. I did not realize it was governed by a government code section. I thought it was something that could be determined by the council, such as our meeting dates. So I was surprised and interested to learn that. And I'm in the same place, given our experience recently with initiatives. I would be very hesitant to put forward an initiative that had not been something that was mentioned or urged or thought of by our citizenry. So if and when that occurs, then it would be something to consider, but I don't feel comfortable in putting it forward without having some movement by the public to put that in place.
Further discussion. Councilmember Brzezinski.
Yes, as the 4th term council member sitting on the council, only the 2nd person in the history of the town who served 4 terms, the other being Joanne Benjamin. I find it really important that this be something that is driven by the community, that's where it arises. I think we hear it every once in a while, particularly when a decision that some members of the community don't want is approved, and it occurs, but then it doesn't have the same kind of groundswell that we've heard from some other segments of the community on occasion. So I would agree. If this is generated out of the community itself, out of the citizenry, and that means that they take up the charge to go ahead and solicit for this purpose, then it sounds like it would be something that the citizens would want and we would respond to. As noted in the staff report, this was in 2009, I guess. There was a previous movement that was generated. I believe it was by a member of the council, but it did not get legs at that time. And from my perspective, I think that if I am in any way sensitive to the needs of the community, then it will be a wait and see response that I give. But I agree with the Vice Mayor and with the Councilwoman Spector that it should come from the body politic.
Councilmember McKnight.
Thank you, Mayor. And of course, as the only member of council, at least right now, who this has absolutely no impact on, since I'm not running again, I'm in a kind of a different position. But I do actually agree with everything that everyone has said. When our residents care about something, we know it. We get communication from them. We get letters to the editor. There are editorials. There are crowds in the council chambers, and I have not heard either personally or as part of the public process any real traction on this on the part of residents. So I think our for so many people in any community, they don't have any clue as to how the process works. They don't know how many years you serve. They don't know how many terms you can have. They're just totally oblivious until they care about one particular thing, and then they get educated. But if they want it, they will let us know. And they also always have the opportunity to get rid of anyone who's serving on council if they feel that you've gone past your expiration date and that you should be eliminated by just not, voting you back in again. So I agree with where everyone else is at.
All right, so I will weigh in. The reason why I brought this forward, and I appreciate my fellow council members deliberating on this, and this is, of course, the perfect reason why you bring it forward, is so the public can become aware. Most communities have term limits, and most of our public, I think, is not even aware that we don't have term limits. I agree with all the points of view. If you don't want to run, you can not run again. Someone can vote you out. And this isn't directed at any particular council member or how many terms anybody's served or whatever. Everybody has served the council and served the council well. And to go, as Councilmember Brzezinski mentioned, 4 terms is very admirable. This is more of a forward-looking thing from my point of view. I look at it as the barriers to entry are quite expensive, running a campaign and garnering the support that it could take to beat an incumbent. And I think that's probably why the ideology of term limits came into play, partially, and partially because it just allows what I see as a more open government for the people. Now, a good point of view, which was made by all 4 of my fellow council members up here, was that the people could bring this forward. And Councilmember Brzezinski alluded to in 2009, it was brought forward. And in 2009, they did have enough signatures, but I think there was some mechanical error on the paperwork. So in effect, at one point in time, there was a movement. Now, discarding any movement or any previous actions, this is a council decision, and this is up for discussion this evening. And at the very least, I think we all received some education out of this, because I was not aware that it was going to require a vote of the people or to be put on the ballot. I just looked at this as an attempt, because of the last couple elections that have been that we've had in town for council, and myself being a party to one of those elections, the amount of candidates that have stepped forward has been limited. And I think part of the reason for that limitation, and I heard it at the council meeting prior to the last election we had, that people wanted choices, and I think the lack of choices could have some could be the result of the cost of running an expensive campaign for a job that doesn't pay, which is truly a volunteer job, to beat an incumbent or whatever. So for me, I just looked at it as an opportunity to discuss this issue, to see if on behalf of the people of Los Gatos, they would be interested in something like this, to perhaps to provide more choices of candidates in the future elections in Los Gatos. And that's why I brought it forward. So I appreciate everyone's dialogue on this. So looking to staff for direction based on the discussion we've heard, it doesn't appear that there will be any motions needed or such and such. We just had a formal discussion about this, and if someone in the community, I guess we have a public hearing. So if there's a speaker who would like to speak on this subject, please come forward. We have one so far.
Lee Quintana, 5 Palm Avenue. I don't wish to speak on the subject, but I would like some clarification of what the council means by being brought forward by the public. Does that mean having to actually go out and get signatures on a formal initiative package? Or does it mean the public communicating with the council saying, we would like to see this happen, we'd like the council to put it on the agenda?
Can staff answer those questions?
Well, in general, it would mean that the citizens would bring forward a petition. However, council is certainly open to putting a ballot measure forward if they hear from folks in the public setting or otherwise. are asked to put a measure on. So it would still be the council's decision as to whether you would put a ballot measure on after just hearing from people or from a formal petition.
Okay.
And maybe to clarify, after the lessons of the Albright ballot measure, 3 ways this could come forward. 1, citizens could communicate to the council, and the council could choose to put it on themselves. The other extreme is citizens could file with the town clerk administrator's office and the town attorney a petition and a notice to file a notice of intent to circulate a petition and go through the whole petition process. If sufficient signatures were collected and certified, then the council would also have the choice at that time to either place that petition initiative on the ballot or to adopt it as is on their own vote. So that's kind of the middle path. There's 3 paths that could come forward.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you for the answers on that. And, you know, one of the questions that was brought up earlier by Assistant Town Manager Pamela Jacobs was she wasn't sure how many of these were actually council-initiated initiatives or voter-initiated initiatives. And I would just be curious to know that as maybe a follow-up. But that will be, I guess, saved for informational purposes later. Right. So any further discussion? Seeing none, the meeting is now adjourned. Thank you, everybody, for coming tonight.